Hey, welcome to Jake's Place. I'm Jake and I love pirates. Pirates are fun. Look, here's me dressed up as some kind of space pirate for this little cartoon thing I did. You can check that out after this video. It's cool, you don't have to. This new show, Our Flag Means Death, I think is fucking fantastic. It's brilliant in so many ways. Check out my review, I'll probably put one of those up. But is it historically accurate? That's what we're here to discuss today. Major spoilers for Our Flag Means Death Season 1 coming up. So let's start with the main protags and go from there. Stede Bonnet was a real-life pirate, as you probably know. The gentleman pirate was indeed real and is fairly accurately portrayed in Our Flag Means Death thus far. Sort of. Stede earned the name the Gentleman Pirate not because he was particularly kind or gentlemanly, but simply because of his upbringing and his background. In the show, however, he is portrayed as a kind soul, but in reality, he simply earned that nickname because of his wealth. Not anything he did particular. He was a bit eccentric, but anyway. Stede was born in Barbados in 1688 to a wealthy family, and at aged 16, his father died and he inherited a sugar plantation which was like 400 acres. That is a shitload of land. He was given the rank of Major in the Barbados militia, probably because of how much land he owned, and slave revolts were not uncommon, and thus squashing them was one of the Barbados militia's roles, really, was just, keep your slaves in check. His rank was probably title only, as Stede was said to be rather bookish. In other words, he was a freaking nerd. Anyway, unhappy with his married life, he decided to ditch his family and become a pirate. No one knows for sure why he did this. He had 3 kids, but one died, so maybe he just snapped. He chucked it all in and fucked off to the high seas. Again, no one really knows why he left a life of comfort and wealth to hit the high seas with 0 sailing experience at all. He'd only ever sailed as a passenger, and as a pirate, the penalty, if you were caught, was to be hanged. So that's always going to be hanging over his head. All accounts suggest he had a midlife crisis. And thus, this was accurately portrayed in the show as well. Another thing the show did well was, unlike pretty much every other pirate known to history, Stede did not steal his ship, he bought one. In the show, he had one built for his pirating adventures, but in reality, he probably just bought one that was already made and kitted it out. He put about 10 guns on there, and he did in fact wear fancy clothes, and thus an extensive wardrobe was probably on board the ship, which he named Revenge. The ship, not his wardrobe. The ship is named Revenge. Remember, Stede had only ever traveled on ships as a passenger. He was not in the Navy and didn't really have any enemies, so probably he chose the name Revenge simply because he thought it sounded cool or menacing in some way. In fact, many pirate ships were named Revenge or had Revenge in the name, so it wasn't even a particularly unique name at that. Yo, real quick, I started editing this video and for whatever reason I completely missed. I must have just read over it or whatever when I was improvising, but the most accurate thing about the show and history is that Stede Bonnet did have a very, very, very extensive library on board. So much so that it's the most unique part of his ship was that he actually did have a fucking library on his boat, which is just ridiculous and incredibly awesome. One major difference in the show and in history is that Stede hired about 70 men to crew his sloop, his ship, which is significantly more than what we see on board in Season 1. However, he did tactfully pay them a salary. This is very important. This is true, which they also did in the show. Unlike pretty much all other pirate vessels whose crew were paid in portions from whatever booty they stole, Stede tactfully paid his crewmen a wage. Now, I say tactfully because he wasn't a very good sailor, as we know. He was incompetent and ignorant when it came to sailing, but he was intelligent. He knew that he wasn't going to be the most successful pirate, and thus, in order to squash any potential mutiny, he thought that if he paid his crew a wage, a salary, then they would stick around. And in fact, stick around they did. It was quite tactful. One more thing to discuss about Stede and Stede's ship is of course the most iconic part of any pirate vessel, the flag. The flag of the Revenge had a dagger, a skull, and a heart resting upon a bone. Symbols, even on pirate flags, had meanings. A skull would mean death, a red skeleton would mean a violent death, any skeleton with horns would mean some kind of devil worship. Holding up a glass, it's usually a toast to the death. There's a lot of death with these pirates. Heart means life, dagger probably means death, skull, just general pirating, and the little bone underneath, probably some scholars think that it was to represent a scales, the constant balance of life and death, something a pirate has to deal with all the time. Life and death and the balance between the two. Now, this is a pretty nerdy, kind of complex, but very nerdy, very dorky sort of flag, but hey, that's Steed in a nutshell. Now, despite Steed being quite the dork on the high seas, he did have some early successes. He managed to capture several ships early on, mostly due to the competence of his very skilled crew, most of whom were former sailors and or experienced pirates. His early captures solidified, either justly or not, his status as an actual pirate. Steed was a pirate. A pretty shit pirate, but a pirate nonetheless. There is, however, no evidence that he killed a British officer, nor did he take soldiers hostage. Yet, there might have been some of that later on in his career, if you can call it that. Now, on to Edward Teach, aka Blackbeard. Blackbeard was also a real pirate. We all know this. He is probably the most famous of all pirates, right? Unlike Stede Bonnet, very little is known of Blackbeard's early life prior to pirating. In fact, his name, Edward Teach or Edward Thatch, could have been an alias. Pirates often used fake names because if they ever had to go into hiding, or if they wanted to go back to their former life, or just whatever, just to be a little bit more hidden so they're harder to track, pirates often did use fake names. So we don't know if Edward was his real name. We just don't know. We never will know, probably. We do know that he could read and write, which meant that he was at the very least somewhat educated. Remember, unlike today, not everybody could read and write back then. In fact, very few could. Only educated people read. And Thatch, Blackbeard, was quite a prolific reader. So that does tell us a little bit of something about him. He was an educated man, and he was a very, very talented seaman. This suggests that perhaps he was formerly Navy, or at the very least spent a lot of time sailing at sea, either on merchant vessels or whatever. Other real-life pirates that appear in the show include Blackbeard's right-hand man, Israel Izzy Hands. Spanish Jackie was likely inspired by Jacquet de Lalably. Honestly, I can't pronounce that name. Sorry if I'm offending anyone. I don't know how to say that. I've only ever read this name written down. I'll put it up here. She supposedly was a leader of a pirate gang in the 16th century. She probably was real, but we don't really know for sure. Either way, Spanish Jackie seems to be loosely based on her, so probably not a real person, but maybe. And of course, Calico Jack, played by Will Arnett, appears in the show. The thing is, Calico Jack should look more like Steed, as he earned his name Calico Jack because he wore fancy clothes. So Calico Jack probably looked more like Steed than Will Arnett's portrayal of him, or the showrunner's portrayal of him. He also at this time would have been sailing with the most famous female pirates of all time, Anne Bonny and Mary Read. We don't see them in the show. Hopefully we see them in season 2, but Calico Jack definitely, his fame could mostly be attributed to them. Maybe he was definitely with Anne Bonny at the time, which we don't see. So this depiction is not historically accurate at all. But it was a lot of fun. Now let's get on to the juicy stuff. Steed and Blackbeard did in fact cross paths in real life. And they sailed for a time. They even sailed together on 2 occasions. So they did get together, split up, and get back together, and we'll talk about that in a bit. They even captured together Blackbeard's flagship, Queen Anne's Revenge. It wasn't called that at the time, obviously. But I guess the question on everyone's lips is, were Blackbeard and Stede Bonnet, were Edward and Steed lovers? We don't know! The truth is we don't know. But it's well possible. So here's what we do know. After meeting in Nassau, a pirate haven, Steed, who was injured from a former battle, gave over his command of the Revenge to Blackbeard. Some say reluctantly, others say willingly, but regardless, Steed stayed on board as a guest. This is the first clue we get, as it would appear that at the very least, Blackbeard did enjoy the company of Steed, whether that's platonic, mutual respect, just some bros just broing down, or perhaps something else. I mean, otherwise, why not just kick him off the ship? Blackbeard took a lot of ships in his time, and he sure as hell wouldn't keep around the captain of those ships. He must have seen something in Steed, this we know. Also, Steed's crew were not that big a fan of Steed. They didn't pose a threat to Blackbeard, or would have shown any kind of resistance. So then why would Blackbeard keep Steed on board? It's not for fear of the crew revolting, and it's not because Steed was a particularly good pirate. There must have been something else, am I right? Around September, October of 1717, Blackbeard and Bonnet sailed the high seas and successfully plundered at least 11 ships or so before returning to the Caribbean in November. Here, using 2 ships, they successfully captured a 200-ton vessel. We think that it was named the Concorde at the time, which Blackbeard immediately turned into his flagship and renamed it into the infamous Queen Anne's Revenge. So Bonnet was there during the famous acquisition of Blackbeard's most notable vessel. And this is where the story takes a little bit of a turn in reality. I'm going to need to get some more mead for this. Ooh. You're not gonna like this next bit. Around mid-December 1717, Bonnet and Blackbeard separated, but Blackbeard returned Bonnet's ship, the Revenge, to Bonnet. Again, this is another clue that Blackbeard fancied Bonnet, potentially. I mean, why would he give him his ship back? Not either sell it off or put someone else to captain it, which, spoiler alert, he does do that later on. But at this point in time, he let Steed go with his ship and his crew. So Steed nicked off, and after a failed attempt at capturing a huge merchant vessel, Steed's crew became restless and fed up, once again being captained by the incompetent Steed. That being said, not unlike in the show, under Blackbeard's tutelage, Steed did become better at pirating. He was still not that good, but he was better, and he did capture a few vessels. Shortly after Steed's failed attempt at capturing that big vessel, he met Blackbeard again, but this time Blackbeard more or less took over from Steed's ship, probably against Steed's will. Blackbeard put one of his henchmen in command of the Revenge, and Steed once again found himself as a guest on Blackbeard's vessel, Queen Anne's Revenge. Apparently, Steed felt quite betrayed by Blackbeard and expressed his desire to possibly give up pirating. Steed did have a few loyal crewmen at this stage, which he confided in. So this is how we sort of think that Steed was, he was upset that Blackbeard took away his ship. Whether or not he was heartbroken, again, that's up to our imagination. But he was a bit pissed off that his friend, who they had all these great adventures together, took away the command of his vessel, pretty much against his will. So was he a prisoner, or did he willingly give up his ship? I don't know. Around this time, King George, in an attempt to suppress the ever-growing pirate movement, if you will, put forward a proclamation known as the Act of Grace. Act of Grace was a slang term, I can't remember the actual thing, I'll put it here. This essentially meant that all pirates or acts of piracy committed before said date will be excused by way of royal pardon. The idea here is that most pirates stuck to pirating because they didn't really have a choice, and the only other option was to sneak away somehow. Pirates weren't that wealthy. They weren't hoarding loads of gold. In fact, most of the things that pirates would steal is just like rigging and spices and just other shit, that they would sell on, and that would get them by for the next few months before they have to go and get something else. Very few pirates, there are exceptions, but we won't talk about that in this video. Very few pirates were like hoarding loads of gold. And almost no pirates buried their treasure, by the way, although it is fun to fantasize. So, the only other option for pirates was to keep pirating or get captured and fucking hanged. And that's when the Act of Grace came along, which excused pirates pirating. Excused the pirates. If the threat of hanging no longer exists, this is the idea anyway, pirates get a second chance at life, more or less. Then supposedly they will gladly give up their life of crime to pursue legal work, either as privateers, merchants, or just generally honest crewmen on another ship. See, at this time, pirating, they actually were causing a lot of fucking havoc in and around the Caribbean and certain the Americas and all this kind of stuff. They were causing England and Spain and France and just about everyone, they were quite problematic. So by putting this Act of Grace in there, hoping to stop the pirating, they'll just go and end up becoming privateers. So King George was thinking, hey, I'll forgive you, now go and kill some Spanish people, or something like that. So this Act of Grace was a way for Steed Bonnet to return to his old life, or at least be pardoned. So he and Blackbeard headed to South Carolina, where some interesting things happened. There's so much happened in such a short amount of time, I'm just going to brush over it, and the show didn't really touch on those things, so I won't really go into much detail there. But anyway, shortly after the blockade, Blackbeard and Steed headed north, where Blackbeard ran the Queen Anne's Revenge aground. In other words, he beached his ship, and I'm pretty sure he beached the second ship, which was trying to rescue him. And now I think they're down to like 2 ships here, right? So now they needed to concoct a plan. This is where we get what some historians call the dirtiest double cross in history. Now, I don't know if it's the dirtiest double cross in history. I'm sure I could think of I reckon I've been double crossed worse than this, but it's still pretty fucking bad. Blackbeard and Steed decided to go get a pardon. We see this kind of in the show. The mighty Blackbeard has vowed to give up piracy, and that's kind of a huge deal. In the show, they pass it off as a romantic gesture. It could have been, it might well have been a romantic gesture, but as Blackbeard's famous ship had beached, probably he felt he had no other option. At least this is probably what he told to Steed. So Blackbeard was pardoned, set free, and was to wait for Bonnet back on Topsail Island, which is North Carolina area. Steed, having to wait a bit longer to receive his pardon, returned to Topsail Island a bit later, only to find that Blackbeard had completely fucked him over. Pardon my French. Blackbeard did in fact strip the Revenge, beach the majority of Steed's crew, and made away with all of the loot on one of his remaining vessels. All of the loot, all of the booty that him and Steed had collected over the last few months, Blackbeard stole from Steed and ran away. Steed then swore revenge on Blackbeard, and this is where the sad truth, the historical truth, comes in. Supposedly, and this is probably true, very much so, Steed and Blackbeard were never to meet again. And this is more or less where the show ends in season 1. Now I'm going to leave it here. I won't talk about the fate of Blackbeard and Steed. We know that most pirates didn't get a happy ending. There were a few who got away with it all, or just disappeared to history. Maybe they died in prison, maybe they escaped, I don't know, but unfortunately Blackbeard and Steed Bonnet were not so lucky. Look, these guys died like 300 years ago, so I guess I could go into spoilers here. I mean, a quick Google will reveal their fate, but I'm not going to do it. I'm going to leave it here, because if there is a season 2, it'll be fun to see what happens there. Plus, I've been waffling on for like the last fucking 20 minutes, so. We can take some solace knowing, though, that if you remember in the final scenes of Our Flag Means Death, Steed's crew is abandoned on a small island. Really, this was a sandbar. Blackbeard did ditch his crew there, and Steed did rescue them. However, at this time, most of Steed's original crew, they're long gone. A lot of them jumped ship with Blackbeard and fucked off. So the people that were there probably weren't the same people he was sailing with when he first started pirating about. But in the show, it's kind of sweet. Steed did actually rescue his crew from that sandbar, and he still had his ship, the Revenge. They didn't destroy the ship, they just stripped it of anything of value, left a little bit of provisions there. So Blackbeard, it did kind of leave Steed with some provisions. I don't know, maybe he just couldn't carry anymore, we don't know. So the question is, were Blackbeard and Steed Bonnet, the gentleman pirate, were they actually lovers, or were they in love? Did they have a romantic entanglement? We don't know. The sad truth is, we will never know. But it is absolutely 100% possible. And there was a lot of same-sex relationships back in the day. But yeah, it was more than possible, and there is evidence to suggest that there was something about these two that attracted them to each other. I mean, Blackbeard did take a fancy of him. You can have platonic relationships and still be infatuated with somebody and not want to fuck them. But I don't know guys, I'll leave that one up to you to decide. And in fact, the more we dig into the history books, the more we see that Blackbeard was not actually as ruthless as perhaps he is made out to be. In fact, there is no scholarly evidence that Blackbeard tortured or even murdered any of his prisoners. We also know that he loved to read, and he did loot books. When he would raid ships, he would raid what little libraries they had on board, which is, I think, quite fascinating. Also, take solace in this, the showrunners did say, flippantly, but they did say that if there is a season 2, they are happy to abandon certain historical truths in pursuit of a more romantic telling or a relationship. So if there is a season 2, they might do an alternate take on history. The reality is, where the show left off, in history, they never met again. But this is a fictional retelling. Look at it like a multiverse thing, but what if? So we might see them get back together. In fact, I hope they do, because most history, although it is fascinating, ends in tragedy, especially when it comes to pirates. So, I don't know. We'll see. The fact remains that they well and truly could have ended up together, at least for a short period. Thanks for watching, my friends. My name is Jacob, and this is Jake's Place. If you like my videos, check out some of my other stuff. I've got lots of things. I've been doing this for a while. If you want me to do more history versus whatever, let me know. I'm usually leaning more into science fiction on this channel, but I do love pirates, and I do love history. I'm a nerd. I love this shit. I think Our Flag Means Death is one of the most beautiful shows that's ever been created. I honestly believe that. It is... oh man, it fucking moved me. Let's put it that way. There was a few little things, like I said, as a history guy, I'm like, ugh, but it doesn't matter, because it's just fun, isn't it? It's a comedy. It's just fantastic. If you liked it, leave a comment. Let me know what your favorite part about Our Flag Means Death is. And answer me this, if you were a pirate, what kind of pirate flag would you have? I like to think that I would have something like, I love the idea of toasting death. As a heavy metal guy, I think that's pretty fucking cool. I would also, you gotta have a skull on there. It's a pirate flag, and maybe something celestial, a star, some kind of star thing, or a Milky Way galaxy. That's what I'd have. What would you have? Leave a comment and let's get a friendly discussion going. Be kind to each other. I love you very much. Goodbye.